Mr. Shakespeare did not come to London until probably 1592. That was when he first arrived. And it is inconceivable to me that somebody coming from Stratford, who would have had a Warwickshire accent, who would have had no way of having learnt Italian or Hebrew, would have had no way of developing intense musical skills, because none of his relatives were musicians, and none of his community, as far as we know, were professional musicians. There's no way that within like 12 months he could suddenly drop his Warwickshire accent, start writing standard English that was intensely musical, making lots of Hebrew and Italian puns, and referring to hundreds of literary works, which he probably have had no reason to read in Stratford. So there is just no social context that makes any sense. In 1622, the quarto of Othello was published, which has 163 lines missing from it, which were then added in between 1622 and 1623, when the first folio is created. And these 163 lines expand the part of the character Emilia, and they also create the Willow Song, and Emilia is asked to repeat the Willow Song. What doth thy song-bowed lady, willow, I will die to music, willow, 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 willow. Now, this combination of an Emilia and a willow, 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 dying like a swan to music, is part of a broader pattern that exists right across all the Shakespearean plays, which I call the swan signatures. And in order to understand them, you need to know that the dying swan to music, which comes from Ovid, is the standard image of the Renaissance poet, the great poet. And there are two other places where it appears. Firstly, in King John, where the person who's saying it is Henry, who is John's son. And the other place it appears is in Merchant of Venice, where the person it's referring to is Bassanio, who is going to die like a swan in Portia's tears. And this is no coincidence, because these names, Emilia, Johnson, Willow, Bassanio, are the names of England's first published woman writer, Emilia Johnson Willoughby Bassanio. She has written her own names into the plays and associated them with the standard Renaissance image for the great poet, as a way of showing us very clearly that she wrote them so that she would eventually be known for what she had done. Well, thank you for coming and talking about this new approach to Shakespeare.
Thank you for having me.
You have heard a little bit about it, and what's your sort of immediate response to what you have heard?
Well, I like to approach any new idea with the philosophy that those who are secure dare to question, and those who dare to question dare to risk. And if, as artists, it's celebratory, it's wonderful to be able to instead of dig one's heels in with the traditional, to say, okay, I believe this, but let's be courageous enough to take a risk and listen to something that might have a great validity. Yeah. And so I think this is quite an engaging project.
She's only really been considered once before by one scholar, who was Gilyoff, the Russian scholar, in his book, I think it's called The Great Phoenix. And he concluded that, isn't it strange that her poetry is like some of the best poetry in the 17th century, and some of it actually quite like Shakespeare. Well, she being a woman, and a lower-class woman, and a dark-skinned lower-class woman, she couldn't have written her own poetry, and both her own poetry and the Shakespearean poetry had to have been written by an English earl. So that was the conclusion he reached, because he started with different assumptions. But my assumptions are that if her poetry has, these similarities to the Shakespearean works, which it does, since Salvadeus has like a 160-line masque in it, which is similar to the Masque in the Tempest, has similar rare words, like dictina and dictima, which are both hapexes, meaning they're absolutely
absolutely.
unique, has similar rare word clusters like the relationship of birds and ditties and
Ditty,
warbling, all of those things, and many, many more examples like that, similar use of rare words to do with frost impacting the tops of plants. So it has a lot of stylistic similarities to the Shakespearean works. Well, since she was a major experimental poet, that to me says she should at least be seriously considered for having written not only her own works, but also as the author of the Shakespearean plays. And if you look at her biography, she was in exactly the right time, at exactly right places, at exactly the right times. She was mistress to the man in charge of the English theatre, Lord Hudson, for 10 years. She came from a family of musicians. About 16 of her family were all professional musicians, including her maternal cousin, Robert Johnson, who is the person who wrote the music for at least 5 of the Shakespearean plays. And in Elizabethan London, you would tend to give work to the people you knew. So the fact that she was giving work to her cousin Robert Johnson, writing the music for the plays, makes perfect sense.
One of the things that I'm sure that someone is going to ask you, though, is why, for all the validity of this that you are presenting, why does Mr. Shakespeare let this happen? Why does he lend his name?
Well, Mr. Shakespeare is, in my view, the person who brokered the plays, and Johnson, in his private diary, Timber, says that he gave the plays to the actors, but Johnson says that he wished he had blotted line. The actors claimed he gave them scripts which were so perfect that he never blotted line, and Johnson says, quote, "I wish he had blotted 1,000." In other words, he was distributing the script perfectly well, but he was actually just doing so as a play broker, not as the author.
Right.
And I cannot believe, because, for example, there are 2,000 musical references in these plays, which is like one every 50 lines. I cannot imagine, that Mr. Shakespeare is sort of sitting there writing and saying, "Oops, I need a musical reference. Let me go and get one from somebody else." Or, "Oops, I need a Hebrew reference or an Italian reference." Or some reference to feminism, to the works of Christine de Pizan or the works of Margaret of Navarre. I mean, there are too many of these things. So you have to say, inventing a Shakespeare who actually doesn't know anything, but keeps having to borrow, the musical references and the falconry references and the rare plant references from somebody else, and that becomes just plain ridiculous.
You are proposing the point then that Shakespeare himself was as a broker,
Yes,
as opposed to the playwright, and so therefore, as long as this was selling and this was working, and I mean, as anyone says, well, art's got to pay off too.
He was getting a payoff from this. I mean, he had found a great way to make money from being an actor, and from being a play broker.
How do you use the term feminist?
Yes.
In terms because it's not as we would consider it.
No. Right? I mean, one should really properly speak of proto-feminism, but by showing strong, educated women who are reading, who are willing to stand up for their own views, as Emilia does, in the so-called feminist manifesto in Othello. And who are highly educated. I think it shows a particular class of women in English society that was very, very rare. I mean, there weren't that many women who had that sort of background, and most of them would be associated with court, or they were gentlewomen like Anne Locke, who was like one of the 4 top most educated gentlewomen in the country. But it was a very small segment of people, because women were generally not educated. Few were, but not on the whole they weren't. And Emilia was actually unusual in having been brought up by a duchess and a countess and a lord in the Willoughby household from the age of 7. That's not the sort of thing that normally happened to girls from lower class families.
You also approach the idea of the use the use of or the engagement of the Bible, the study of the Bible in the text, and I I had mentioned to you earlier about the reference of Miranda in The Tempest.
Yes, well, my own view of The Tempest is that, like all the Shakespearean plays, it actually contains an allegory. Early on, we have when Ferdinand first meets Miranda, we have "Behold, most sure the goddess," which is an allusion to the Aeneid, of course, and we then have Miranda being described having eyes like fringe, her eyelashes like fringe curtains, and her name Miranda means wonder, and she exists in this little world where the character Caliban, who exists together with Trinculo and Stephano, as basically the three clowns. Two of whom dress up in this Jewish gabardine. Well, Caliban is a word that comes from the Caribs, which is a place in the West, specific place in the West Indies where headless cannibals were living, and we have Stephano meaning the crowned one, and we have Trinculo meaning the three asses, the three bottoms. So if you have these people taken together, you have the sort of the three crowned cannibalistic asses. And in my view, what these creatures are, and the reason why they dress up in a Jewish gabardine, is because they are actually an allegory for the three Flavian Caesars, Vespasian, Domitian, and Titus, who did in fact dress up in the clothes of a Jew in order to present the Messiah figure of Jesus in the Gospels. And in this, I can show you the full analysis. And the reason he has a smell like a fish is, of course, Jesus was the ichthus of the fish.
Correct.
So you could actually, and you go through and you can find like hundreds of points of fit. The problem with any allegorical interpretation is that people just try to make allegorical interpretations based on 3 or 4 points of fit. And that's really crazy because it's arbitrary. However, this particular allegorical structure fits at least 1,000 different major cruxes across all the plays. And this is something that no allegorical system should be able to do unless it's pretty right.
Right. I like very much the idea that watching briefly the film clip of your description of women studying the text, the Bible, of the Bible, for themselves.
Yes.
And I think there again, though, it gives credence to your and strong credibility to the idea that a woman's voice, a woman's perspective, in these works holds.
Absolutely. I mean, just take Juliet for example. I mean, the case of Juliet is the first presentation of sexual desire by a woman on stage in England. I mean, who would do that? You know, and there's so many unusual countercultural presentations, not just of women, but also of Italian things. I mean, we've got 2 plays, both about Venice. We have a play about Jews. We have a play about Moors. Are these written by somebody who doesn't know Jews and doesn't know Moors and doesn't know Venice, or is it not written by someone who actually comes from a family of Venetian Jewish Moors?
or is so truthful in the presentation of the sexual adolescent desires of Juliet.
Absolutely.
And for the tragedy of Romeo and Juliet is really weighted more in that text towards Juliet. Juliet goes through much more of a maturing arc than does Romeo.
Absolutely, which is why the play starts as Romeo and Juliet. It starts the play of Juliet and Romeo.
Yes.
It's the actual plot and migration of the play. And it's really, I mean, Juliet is the person in charge in this play. I mean, in the use of the falconry language, and these plays have 15 times more falconry language than any other plays, which I think is because she was living with Lord Hudson, who was the royal falconer, But in the case of the use of the falconry language, she is actually playing the part of the falconer and using falconry language to lure in the tassel gentle, which is unheard of.
Well, and using the nurse.
Yes. Yes.
Off she goes to Romeo, and Mercutio's King Cophetua. And King Cophetua loved the beggar maid.
Yes, well, that's interesting, very interesting, because King Cophetua and the Beggar Maid is the most popular song in the plays. It's used 4 times, and it is the song of a young black girl who falls in love with a black king of Africa. Now, why would Mr. Shakespeare from Stratford have such interest in a song about this subject? Well, difficult to see, but I think it makes perfectly sense if you're talking about a young black girl living with the son of Henry VIII. Being interested in that song, it's much more visible, credible biography for it. So I think altogether there is the circumstantial evidence which we've really been talking about. Then there is the evidence of the swan signatures, which are the cases in the plays which refer to a swan dying like music, dying to music, which is the standard Renaissance image of the great poet. And there are 3 swans who die in music. One's a King John, where it's referring to Henry as John's son. One of them is Bassanio in Merchant of Venice. One of them is in Othello, where it's Amelia. I'm repeating the Willow song, and these names, Amelia and a Willow and a Johnson and a Bassanio, are this woman's names, because Amelia is the name she was baptized with, Willow is the name of the Willoughby family, Johnson is her mother's maiden name, and Bassanio is her father's family name. So I cannot imagine why Mr. Shakespeare would have deliberately, between 1622 and 1623, after the publication of the Quartet of Othello, have gone out of his way to leave the evidence behind after he died to arrange this for all to happen. It makes absolutely no sense at all.
You're so committed. You're so committed
It doesn't.
to it.
You can't imagine Mr. Shakespeare. Well, please make sure that when my works are published, you put in this extra piece for a character called Amelia, and here are the 163 extra lines to add in, so that I will associate the great image of the poet with this other woman. My God, it's crazy. I mean, it's absurd.
Well, I was speaking to one of my friends about this the other night. I gave him a call, and he burst into the phone, and he said, well, it makes so much sense. And I said, why does it make sense? And he said, why else would these plays become so universal, be universal and hold up so well and being played over and over again if there wasn't a balance of that strong female, and at that time a woman writer being so having to write under cloak, as it were, is so attuned to how men work in society, how men work in private, listen to the political, are the sounding boards, and then be able to balance their female perspectives, needs, desires, and so those folded into Shakespeare's works, or not, really allow for such a balance that makes these plays universal.
I absolutely agree. These plays are the product of someone who was in a position of being able to listen to the most amazing conversations. And the conversations at court during Elizabethan England. I mean, she was not a major actor in any of these things, but she was there as a listener, and she absorbed it, everything, and then spent the rest of her life sort of recounting it all and creating these wonderful, wonderful plays. I want to come back to one point made about the Bible, which is that the plays actually use 14 different translations of the Bible, and this is enormous. I mean, I normally, when I've done biblical work, I maybe use 5 translations, and people had identified before, obviously like Knight in the 30s, that there were all these sort of Christ allegories and things, but they only identified pieces of them. And they had not been able to get very far because they assumed that they were written from a Christian point of view. And they aren't. They're written from a Jewish point of view, and once you understand that, then you can actually make sense of them. But everybody had said, some of them have, because in some plays you have multiple Christ figures, and it just doesn't make any sense in terms of Christian theology. But it makes sense in terms of a Jewish perspective, which is just beginning to penetrate New Testament studies, showing that in fact at the end of the Jewish War, the three Flavian Caesars were involved in creating the Gospels essentially as a vehicle for their own worship as a Caesar cult, and which is why in the case of the Emperor Titus, who was from 79 to 81, that there are 11 different key events in the life of Titus. Start in his war conquest in Judea. His war conquest in Judea starts at the Lake of Galilee, where he drives all the Jews into the lake and pulls them out like fish. Then it goes to Gadara, where he drives all the Jews over the cliff like wild beasts, and so on and so on and so on, until he reaches Thekoa, where he crucifies 3 people and has them taken down by a man called Josephus Bar Matthias, and one of them survives at the hands of a surgeon. Well, the life of Jesus in the Gospels is exactly the same. It starts with the career starts at the Lake of Galilee, calling people to be fishers of men. Goes to Gadara, where he drives all the demons all over the cliff, and ends with the crucifixion, where indeed he's taken down from the cross by someone called Joseph of Bar Arimathea, and survives. And what I find most fascinating is that the author of Midsummer Night's Dream, in crafting the death account of Pyramus, refers to it using a rhetorical structure called the inclusio, which starts with a passion and ends with a passion. And inside this inclusio or envelope, there is the account of him being stabbed in the side, the light disappearing. They say die, 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 which the footnote says is a reference to dice playing. And then there is a little bit which says, he may yet recover and prove an ass. Well, this shows that it's making an allusion both to the gospel account of the crucifixion and to the account of the crucifixion in Josephus in the autobiography in the War of Titus. In other words, the author is saying, hello, I know that these two accounts are linked and that one is a literary rewriting of the other. And what's more, she doesn't just do it then, she also does it other places as well. For example, I'm currently working As You Like It, and in the account of Jane Smile, this mysterious character Jane Smile, well, it's not a smile, it's a simile. And Jane is the Hebrew for the Lord is gracious, and it exists yet again within an inclusio of 2 mentions of the Passion in an envelope in exactly the same way. And Jane is there on a chiasmus, which is a literary cross, and there's a kissing of her battler, and the drawing the sword and the stone, which is like St. Peter drawing the sword in the Garden of Gethsemane. It's another little biblical allegory. And the whole bloody plays are full of these very, very clever biblical parodies. But unless you know that these are written by somebody who is Jewish and is parodying this stuff, then you think, what does it mean? Everybody looks at it and says, well, it doesn't mean anything.
You also have thinking about this before I came here today, and being very busy now with a couple of projects, things that leap into that, which is good, because when one's mind is caught up in a lot of projects, they lend themselves to be a great sift. That process allows for one to sift through to the immediacy of elements in a theory that you propose, and I immediately leapt to the point of how balanced, not just how Jews are approached in Shakespeare. Some could argue that they're not. It's not, but I think great sympathy, great argument, great sensitivity, and proposing wonderful conflicts, internal conflicts, very spiritual, emotional, intellectual conflicts that these characters engage in, making them so human and yet still holding to
Yes.
the fact that that was a fine line that this woman would have to draw upon.
Yeah, I mean,
Especially
yes.
because she's alluding all the time to men,
Absolutely, and especially
Jewish
because
men.
at the time, Jews were identified as devils in popular literature, and even Barabbas in The Jew of Malta is a fairly sort of wicked portrayal. But it's absolutely right. Am I? If you prick me, do I not bleed? I mean, it's absolutely a very humanized, realistic view of what Jews were, and it's really the
Well, and
first one.
also in a court. I mean, just taking it in the idea of justice in court, and just the way it's all framed, and that a woman,
Yes,
I mean, for Portia,
yes.
to really be a female being, I mean, what a great idea for the. I mean, let's go with your theory here, to have Portia be the person to be a judge, to be an advocate, to be.
And to be a law, I mean, she's a lawgiver, and she comes from Belmont, the mount of the Lord, and she's accompanied by Nerissa, who's a rainbow lady, and all the caskets have all these things to do with Torah interpretation.
But the setup of that, even the setup of Portia on the testing,
Yes.
of which for her court here,
Yes.
for those who court her, when they come in, and how she is so delicate about the understanding the male, then the man that she is drawn to, then to be able to take that and apply it to the Jew, a Jew so sensitively, setting that up in the beginning really allows for a humanization of that character that I think really would fall in the realm of a Jewish woman, a woman who understands that kind of prejudice of that time.
Absolutely. I mean, it shows an insight that, I cannot imagine Mr. Shakespeare having the life experience to have had, any more than he had the musical experience or the falconry experience or the knowledge of Italian. It's just not there. And, for the first time, we have a candidate who actually matches.
What is really going to be engaging is how this will impact, I think, the playing.
Absolutely.
The playing of the material, which is what really drives all the research
Absolutely.
anyway.
I mean, 2 years ago, when I first got final state on this, I took this to Michael Kahn, who was at Juilliard, and said, look, here it all is. And he said, well, I must ask you the director's question. How does it change the performance? What would it look like? So I said, okay, I'll go away and show you. So I went away and recruited a group of actors, they're called the Dark Lady Players, and we put on our first performance at the Washington Shakespeare Festival last year of Midsummer, using a shortened text of about an hour and a quarter, which just picked up the allegory. So we have Titania becomes Titus, and Oberon, who is a jealous, invisible lord whose words come out of the solar psalms, turns out to be Yahweh, and the little Indian boy turns out to be who is crowned with thorny flowers and whose mother is a virgin votaress, turns out to be the figure of the Messiah, who is indeed stolen away and turned into a changeling by Titania, because that's what actually happened at the end of the Jewish War. And there's a whole big allegory which Patricia Parker, in fact, had identified part of, and I just had to identify the rest of it. But we did this, and it was very, very visual, and I hope we can show.
Did Mr. Kahn come back?
Mr. Kahn did not in the end go and see it. After having said he would see it. Well, he did give me space at the Smithsonian to go and do it there, which I did. So that was good. But we're now doing a very different dramaturgical style, which puts in more explanation and uses a lot of clowning.
I think this would be very good along. You've probably seen the Barton tapes.
Yes, I know the Barton tapes.
All right. I think it would be very good as having actors engage not in so much of the production, but have the actors, very prominent actors and directors, engage in a similar fashion, and show how this can be an enhancement, add depth, add richness, and flesh out even further the universal elements that Shakespeare that we live and pay over and over again to see these plays. So I think that would be, because then you would have I think, material that would not only be a good teaching tool,
Yes.
to get a new generation to understand, because bottom line, I mean, and Michael Kahn did, as he does always,
Yeah.
cuts to the chase.
Yeah.
How is it going to impact the work? If it doesn't impact the work, then it's just
Agreed.
philosophy, and you can't
Agreed.
play philosophy.
Agreed.
You can't play an atmosphere.
Absolutely.
But if you can play the intellectual, the emotional, and let it, because actions speak louder than all of the dialogues that could happen about this, but have them play, because actors love that. Actors, they love to get in, and Lee Strasberg said one time, "Do you always believe you're right?" And an actor said, "Yes, until I'm proven wrong," which means I'm going to commit to it. So if you can get a skeptic to come in and then give over to it, as all actors do, they want to be to discover something new in themselves,
Right.
and to expand their awareness. So if you can get them to flesh out,
Yes.
and flesh out these this theory, I think then you have something that's very applicable, and something that's going to be very viable to take on to another generation.
Well, I'm very concerned about, that this work does not get lost or get buried in academia.
That's why you'll come to the Kennedy Center American College Theatre Festival.
That's delighted. I'd be delighted to come and do that. I think that sounds wonderful, and
Well, good.
It makes me feel sort of confident that there's somebody out there listening to me,
Well-
because that's one of the hardest things with this stuff. With complete some radical, it's like, okay, there's so many people say, oh well, like Sir Peter Hall said, no, I know it must be wrong. I won't read it. I know it must be rubbish. It's like so many people sort of closed. And some people.
Well,
actually,
I go back as we
As
close
you
this
said,
as we
yes,
close this out.
yeah.
Those who are secure
yeah.
dare to question.
Yes.
Those who dare to question dare to risk.
Yes.
If you don't, what do we teach our students all the time? What do we say to each other? Take a risk. You have to take risks in your work, and if you don't take risks in your thinking, then you cease to only play out that which you have accepted and explored, but never questioned.
Well,
And so poor Peter Hall.
thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you.
Thank you.